Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you'll be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. If you've been inspired by the guests that we've had on the podcast, please like, subscribe, comment, hit notification bells, whatever you can do on the platforms that you're listening on, so that more people have the opportunity of hearing these and engaging in our community. Hi everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne. Our guest today is Dwayne Roberts. Dwayne, for people that don't know who you are, could you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Yeah, it's actually a pleasure to be with you guys. I'm excited about this conversation. Born and raised in Canada, 19 years old, went to Europe for basically 10 years. A year and a half, 2 years in, got married to my best friend, Jennifer, and spent 10 years in YWAM, basically. 6 years in Amsterdam, did 4 years in Budapest, Hungary, kind of pioneered the YWAM base there, helped pioneer it. And then, long story short, we ended up in the heart of America in Kansas City in 1998. And then that was the year that Mike Bickle started to preach and just proclaim a call to prayer. It was just such a radical thought, 24/7, never even thought about it. So Jennifer and I, we had a 1.5-year-old at the time, jumped in and spent 15 years at the International House of Prayer in Kansas City there. Loved those years, transformative into changing me, introduced me to a love for Jesus, a love for the Word of God, and to live from a place of communing with Him, and changed my life. Loved it. And then we, 2013 it was, we went to Brazil for 6 years and basically planted in a city called Florianópolis, southern Brazil, a prayer room and a church and then training. And so very similar to what was going on at IHOP. And then as a little bit of a surprise, won't go into all the details, 2019, we moved back to the States and pastored 2 years in Denver. And now we've been back in KC area for about a year and a half. So that's my life for the short run.
And then for people that listen to this that want to find out more about what you're doing now, where could they do that?
Oh, appreciate that. They're going to go to DwayneandJennifer.com, but there's not much there. Follow Instagram, kind of. We're a little bit under the radar, to be honest with you, right now. And so I'm not doing a ton publicly. We have a little podcast, Dwayne and Jennifer, on YouTube. That'd be the best way, probably, yeah.
Okay, and I'll put those links in the description box, so for people listening, they're there ready for you to go and check out.
Perfect.
So you've mentioned about houses of prayer, you mentioned about IHOP, which we love going there dearly, and going to Brazil. There are probably people listening and thinking, prayer? 24/7 hours of prayer? It stretches me to get up in the morning and pray and remember when I go to bed. So,
totally.
Can you give us a bit of the heart of why you would choose to focus, or Jesus would choose to focus you on what is at the heart of 24/7 prayer?
Yeah, absolutely. It was like maybe some are listening, it was a radical thought to me, never heard of it. And so in 1999, when we were here, Mike Bickle, who was the founder and still of the International House of Prayer, starts preaching on prayer. And there were some thoughts that I had just never even really considered. And so the first one for me would be the revelation of God that has come to us through the Word of God, particularly Revelation chapter 4 and 5. You see, first of all, the central point of all creation is actually God, and then what you see is 10,000 times 10,000 angels, the 24 elders, and then the 4 living creatures. And their focus is God, and then it happens day and night. And so there is this discovering of the eternal beauty of the uncreated God, and He is worthy to be looked upon day and night, and from worship come forth. And so King David, I believe, captured some of that. He We know that he saw into the sanctuary. And so that revelation of God came to him. And then from that place, he said, I'm going to do it on the earth. And so I think the real first time sustained worship was introduced was because King David was captured. Like, there's something beautiful beyond creation, and it's the God who created it. So that would be the roots, I think, of where this idea of constant prayer came forth. It was not actually intercession; it was worship, I think. And then you've got it all throughout church. I mean, throughout Israel, in the different revivals of Israel, they would go back to the temple, go back to the place of worship. And then really church history is full of unceasing, consistent, different models of two people in a room. You know, Europe, most recently, the Moravians marked, I think, a shift in the focus of the church because of what they laid in prayer. So that consistent prayer is a biblical concept where, you know, Luke is the one that gives us most of the writing, most of the teaching on prayer from Jesus' perspective. And both Luke 11 and Luke 18, persistent prayer is highlighted. And then it's in Luke 18, day and night will you not cry out. And the outrageous thing that I've just now really solid in my heart that I just don't get my head around, but it's an incredible honor, is that God invites human beings into prayer in that place of partnership to release his purposes. And so I think that's why we've had an explosion in prayer, and the body of Christ is only going to mature in this place of worship, communing, prayer, and intercession. I'm positive it's going to mature and grow even more.
One of the things that heartens me in what you say, and again, I'm connecting with these people that are going, what? I just don't get this. When you listen to your heart and listen to what you're saying, I believe that people can go, wow, that's just way beyond me. I'm just not in that kind of super spiritual place. When I listen to you, and you said the heart of it is in David, if we go back to who David was, he was a forgotten boy on the hillside. I mean, he was even forgotten by his family. So he just wasn't in the lineup. And then who was David? What sins did he commit? I mean, he did some pretty outrageous 100%. Things. And like, I could go, well, I didn't do that. And I think when we get the reality of who God chooses and the enormity of who he chooses. I've just been studying David right the way through to Revelation and the supreme importance of this man who was the outcast on the hillside. I think when we start to identify with moments like that and who you're talking about, suddenly to me, anyway, it becomes, wow, this could include me.
100%. Like, I really appreciate that perspective because it's mind blowing. This speaks to God's incredible capabilities. It's just mysteries. Is that He knows the hair on 7.8 billion. He knows the number of hairs on 7.8 billion or whatever we are today. So God's capacity to track with every single human being is astounding. And it must cause us to worship. And then I think the power that King David touched, because of he's number 8 in the family, not important. So insignificance must have been part of his life. And then his journey tells me he heard God talk about him to himself, to David. I'm positive. The emotions, desire, and God's focus on him somehow touched his life. And we know that from some of the songs he wrote. But he understood God's eyes are on me. God's eyes are on my neighbor, but they're on me. And I believe that is the power that I think will fuel any life of prayer. It doesn't matter if you are distant and sad and bored with God, or you're on fire. Either way, when you understand God's passion, love, pursuit, intimate following of the small details of our lives, the big ones, that captures you. Oh my goodness. And I think that's that's somewhere in there is the secret of David. Like, I'm positive.
So here we are talking to you today. Can you take us back on the journey? Did you come from a family that had this revelation? Were they followers of Jesus? Can you take us back on your history a bit, as far as you want to take us?
Yeah, no, that's great. So, born into and raised in a pastor's home, kind of a Canadian version of like the American Assemblies of God. So, kind of more on the Pentecostal side of life on the spectrum. 2 years, a little boy, lived in Africa. My parents were missionaries there. And so grew up in that environment. So a lot of people will be able to track then what that would have been my environment. And so left 19 to go to the mission field to be with YWAM for 10 years. And so in my home, and in our church as a child and a teenager, just sincerity and hunger for God would probably be one of those things that got formed in me. I didn't have a ton of biblical knowledge. I didn't have a ton of just that laid into the foundation of my life, but just a hunger and a sincere desire to please the Lord, follow the Lord would probably be one of the kind of markings, and probably in my teenage years growing up. And so, especially when you have a couple of prophetic words over your life that are kind of make sense. There's a little bit of mystery in there. So I probably, I really left my home to the mission field, and the focus probably was to fulfill the prophetic words over my life, not really to focus on in a real passionate way discovering God. It was more, how do I fulfill the calling on my life? So the calling and then the prophetic kind of stories, how do I go after them? And so that would really probably even speak into a lot of my 20s. Just really going after ministry and my calling. And I don't think in and of itself that's wrong. I don't think in and of itself that's off. But I had a little crisis, and crisis is maybe strong, but just a true wrestle in my late 20s, doing a ton of missions work, going hard, ministering a lot, and then turning around and seeing a real lack of fruit that was sustainable. And that, so we were in Budapest at the time. So, post a little bit, just the Yugoslavian conflict was winding down, but then the impact of the conflict was really present. So going into some of those areas, like we went down into Sarajevo, all through the former Balkan countries, and just having me aware of my lack to change and help people. And so my conclusion was, I'm doing parachurch ministry. I need to plant churches. And so that would be the impetus that kind of why I left YWAM. That would be, my wife and I, that's why we moved in. And the last thing we did with YWAM was a music festival in southern Hungary. And it was the last thing. And then when we were done, we were going to move to the States. We didn't know what we were going to do, but we knew we were going to make a transition. It was one of those times where you're in transition, but nothing's clear. And we run into a prophetic gentleman, and I shake his hand, and I say, "Hey, I'm Dwayne. Nice to meet you." And he says, "You're Dwayne." And he said, "The Lord woke me up 2 weeks ago in the middle of the night and told me I was going to meet a Dwayne."
Wow.
And he spoke a little bit to my gifting, and then he said, "You're in transition, and there's about a year transition, and then you're going to be planted in a freshly plowed field, a freshly plowed field. You're going to be planted. You're going to take deep root and have much fruit." And that was the cry of my heart. Like, I'm late 20s and I just don't have fruit that remains. That John 15 fruit that Jesus talks about. So that would be what brought us, long story short, won't go into the details. That's how we ended up in Kansas City. And we were going to be in Kansas City for 1 year. And then our plan was to kind of figure out, how do we go back into the nations church planting? And so the very first course, so it was a little Bible school in Mike's church, a little ministry center. And so the first course I take, or one of my first classes, was this strange teaching on the Song of Solomon. And my wife Jennifer, she got saved at 16. Crazy hippie family, gets radically saved at 16. And that became the book that connected her with Jesus. And that book can be kind of viewed different ways, different interpretations and how you apply it, but it's clearly an allegory. And Mike is teaching that book from basically the bridegroom and the bride idea. So Jesus and the church, Jesus and the individual. And there was a couple truths in that teaching that just captured me. And he brought in Isaiah and Isaiah 56. Excuse me, Isaiah. Yes. I want to give you a new name, speaking to Israel, and that is, I delight in you. And as a bridegroom rejoices over a bride, I rejoice over you. And that was a transformative thought. So grew up in the church all my life. Yes, I knew John 3:16. But God not only loves me, but he liked me. And that just little thought right there opened up a long journey into understanding God's emotions towards me. And it was a personal revival that shifted my life in a very dramatic way. The delight of God, he's a God of great mercy that's fueled by his passion for me. And that got me into the overwhelming truths of the same way God the Father loves Jesus, Jesus loves me. And the same way God the Father loves Jesus, he loves me, God the Father. And that just was a shift. And so that would be what launched us into, what launched me into the IHOP years, for sure.
When you say, as God the Father loves Jesus, that's how he loves me. I remember somebody saying from the platform, and it was meant to shock us, theologically what it is. He said, but does God love us the same way as he loved Jesus? Does he not love us more than he loved Jesus? Because he was willing to sacrifice his son for us. So maybe, just maybe, it's more than that. Now, theologically, that's a whole thing. But we forget those dynamics of thinking, of the enormity of what he's done.
For you then, so you grew up a missional family, you grew up on the mission field, you went out as a teen onto missions organization. You knew you were going back to the US, but then going into IHOP, the International House of Prayer in Kansas City.
Not pancakes.
Not the pancakes. They had their own issue with that, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, we'll put that one on the back burner for now. Was that a funny transition for you? Was it like 1 minute you're out going places and now you're at a place which actually was bringing people in? It wasn't so much the sending people out. So how was that as a transition for you?
It's a really great observation, because it's attention. it's a real tension trying to navigate that. When one of the things that was very clear to me is that a lot of my 20s was just activity, but I'm not sure it was fruitful activity. And what's become more and more clear to me is that a life of fruitfulness begins from a place of communion. And that in Jesus is by far the best model. I went often to the lonely desert, to that place. Why? Because of who he was going to meet there. And then from there, I only do what the Father's doing. That's a profound understanding how to live your life and then actually walk out even ministry, but also your career, everything. So that would be the wrestle that took me a while to get to. Activity, just kind of more somewhat out of human initiative. God breathes on it. It works. There's some fruit there. I'm not wanting to deny that, but there's a more powerful way, I believe, by deep communing, that's where I do my life from. And so that was a wrestle early on, like sitting in a chair, talking to a God you can't see, and then measuring the effectiveness of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what then prompted you to then head to Brazil, to plant a house of prayer there? You were at IHOP for quite a while, right? So what was it that prompted you to say, you know what, we need to be heading out?
Well, we were in IHOP we were in Kansas City for 15 years, and then we moved to Brazil for 6. So I'm going to kind of do 2 tracks. I'm now old man, I'm 54. So, but one thing, using just kind of answering that one way, I think that it's a journey to figure out really what you're good at. And now what's become very clear to me is that I have a pioneering gifting. And that is partly what I've always been drawn to, but never really saw it for a while. So I helped pioneer YWAM Budapest. I find myself helping pioneer IHOP. So I think that would be part of it. As I grew in understanding, there was many things in IHOP that I helped pioneer and helped grow out. So as I begin to see some of those things, then that going and starting in our living room in Brazil was an adventure, not something I was afraid of. Now, of course, it's, there's some, I don't know if it's going to work, but so that would be one way I would answer it is at 44, my family, Jennifer and I were both 44. We moved our 3 kids. That's crazy at 44 to do that. Teenagers. So there's that part of us where I think we still are pioneers and the Lord does these things with us. And then another way I would answer that is, sometimes you're like Amsterdam, Budapest, and then boom, the middle of America, like what? And then all of a sudden, God, he spoke so clear, we could not deny we were to go to Brazil. And you're like, back out in the nations again, this is just like all over, and so that was for me a little bit of a jolt. But it's become, just, I feel like there's part of what the Lord's has for me is that nations interaction. And so I really do believe that would be part of it. I'm just going to tell a really quick story that will speak to just even probably more, it's something over me, and I don't even know why I'm going to tell the story, but Jennifer has a dream in December 23rd, 2011, wakes up from the dream and says, I won't give you all the details. Your number is 444. And I'm like, who cares? Like, it doesn't connect with me. I'm like, God's never spoke to me with numbers. What is that supposed to mean? A year and a half later, we're being prayed out of IHOP. And a gentleman walks up and he says, your number is 444. I'm like, whoa, okay. And he says, it's Zechariah 4, it's Acts 4, and it's Ephesians 4. And so Zechariah 4 is Israel coming back from captivity and reestablishing the temple. Acts 4 is incredible, intense persecution and the power of God resting on the early the early church. And then Ephesians 4 is about the church leadership and then everybody working together to properly represent Jesus. And so that landed on me. And so the day that a couple of days before we left, we had a meal with Mike Bickle and some of the leadership, and he goes, "That 444 thing, it's on you, Dwayne." And so there's a grace because it's a theological number in regards to the four corners of the earth. And so I think that also has played in a little bit to that grace on my life, that be in the nation somewhat. And so it's just these things in you as you get older, you can't ignore them as being part. So that's where, I've had the incredible privilege to, over 50 countries. So that would be part of my story. The Lord's, I think, done with me. So I'm living in the States, but I'm still wondering, what about even the nations in the future? It was a long way to answer that question.
No, that's good.
So it's, I think often we are looking in the moment and the yesterday, whereas God, the God of the future, has a whole life plan rather than just, this is where I am, this is where it is. I know as I look back, times I could look at my life and say, I'm doing this, now I'm doing that, now I'm doing this. And I mean, the end of the story's not yet written, but now I see, I can see how that played into it, this played into it, this played into it. So, we only see in part what's going on. And it's that simple trust of, well, this is what it is. Of course, America is part of the nations. So you're still in the nations, whether you're in America or wherever you are,
100%.
You're part of the nations and what God's doing. So I find it, I find it interesting, especially with doing these podcasts and people are looking back to see hitherto has the Lord led me, and He will continue.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Now you're back in the US, which is taking a jump, but so what are you doing now? Because people might think, well, you head back to the US, slide back into IHOP, continue as you were. You obviously had a couple years in, you said Colorado or Denver?
Yeah, I was in Denver,
Yeah, Denver. Yeah. So what was it that, what are you doing now with the house church? But also, what was it that prompted you to think, actually, I want to go in this direction. This is what God's leading us to do.
Excellent. For the globe, 2020 was just a true bump in the road, and for me, I think 2020 it was a Matthew 24. I think it was a little bit of a birth pang.
Yes.
And
definitely.
so one of the questions that I asked was of the Lord personally is, in the midst of a birth pang, what do you want to say to the body of Christ? So you're talking to the nations, the earth, but I believe also you're talking to the church. And, I think for many, it was a year of deep reflection, what's going on. And so it was a year of real personal deep reflection. And then I asked the question, what's your perspective on the church? And for me, I feel like my perspective would be on the American church, just because I was here. We really saw the underbelly, I think, of the church. And the two things I really walked away from is how maybe immature we were. And I saw many struggling with all the voices that were talking about several topics: racism, politics in America. I'm speaking mostly of America here. Racism, politics, COVID, mask, no mask, conspiracy theories, all of these things. And not many voices or individuals in the church I was pastoring could navigate. And I just saw how immature we were. And then for me, the issue of discipleship became something that I was just, and so I had to ask the question, what is my ministry model so far reproduced? And I had to be real honest and say, what have I produced? And that, long story short, took me down a pretty deep bunny hole. And I won't go into all the storyline, but I really began to look at church history, the early church, and what is fruitfulness definition. And so in the American context, we are so driven by numbers, and that equals our degree of success. But yet you look at Jesus, the greatest communicator, the greatest preacher, the greatest teacher, and 60% of the Gospels, it's him talking to 12 people. And he left the earth not with a huge campaign ministry. In his ascension, there was not very many people on the earth, but not many following him actively. But he focused mostly on these 12. And so it just really confronted me, provoked me. So my own identity got messed up in there. What is my definition? What are others going to say about me? Because I have somewhat of a, amongst my peers, a certain reputation. And now Dwayne he's doing what? He's doing a church in his house? What? And so it was a real radical shift in my life, paradigm shifting big time. Here's the main thought I've got. So we've been on this journey for about a year and a half, but Ephesians chapter 4, you have the ascension of Christ, and then ascending, he gives gifts. And so I see it as just Jesus gave different parts of his gifting to different people. So the apostolic, the prophetic, he gives all of these different gifts to different people. And so in many ways, we've been trying to even, at one point it's like, is that even real today? And so we've been trying to discover these gifts. And then as we've discovered them, we've built church around them. And I just saw that these gifts have now become the center of the church. It's platform driven, gift highlighted. That's how we have built the church in the last couple of decades, even more than that. So the next verse, in verse 12, is these are given for the equipping of the saint to minister. And that was like, oh my goodness, I am not supposed to be the center of the show. That was a paradigm shifter for me. I am not to be on the platform. I'm actually to be on the side road, equipping them. And every saint, every believer is a priest. And the function of a priest is to go and minister to God and then minister to others. So that was one of the radical things at the cross. Through his body, we all have access, and we're all priests now. And so that's where, to me, in the house church setting, bivocational individuals walking in their spiritual gifts and pastoring, ministering, teaching, prophesying, healing, relational-based life. I love what you said earlier, Daphne. It's a way of life. It's the rhythm of life doing it this way. And so what's in my heart is, how do we build 500 of these? And so I'm focusing right now on quality. And then there will come a day where I think we'll go to quantity. But what is quality like? What does that look like? A believer that's rooted, theologically built right, matured right. And so it's kind of where I'm focusing right now. So what's in my heart?
If you are wanting to reproduce, and we should be reproducing, the DNA that you establish in where you're at now will be reproduced into the 500. So quality is absolutely essential for healthy reproduction. it's
go on.
and Jesus, he gave us a command, and it wasn't to go out and make churches, it was to make disciples. And it saddens me when I hear people talking about this discipleship thing, or we're discipling here, that even the heart of what discipleship is has become a class or a book or a methodology, not a shared lifestyle, because every model of discipleship in the Bible was a shared life, whoever it was. And so, we're right with you. You cannot do that in a megachurch model. You can do it in small groups. And I will add that our twist on the thing is every model of discipleship in the Bible that we are given, every single one, the discipler was discipling someone who was going to live longer than them. So I just throw that thought in.
Generational discipleship.
It was generational. Even Jesus, he discipled 12 people who were going to live longer than them. Everybody did. And so I think part of the fruit, our deposit is going to be what we leave in the next generation. But that's our theme song on it.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Oh, go on.
Go on, Dwayne.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say it's very interesting, and it's exciting to see. There's you. We've had some other people on here. A pastor in Florida from a mega church. Similar thing. Mega church model is not working, and so he's taken his mega church and decentralized it and making the small groups the focus as opposed to the bigger gathering. We had
sold the buildings.
Yeah,
boom.
Sold the building, the mega church building.
Awesome.
They now meet in this forest area in Florida. Only Florida, right? That they can meet. Basically, there's 2 weeks of the year which are a bit cold. But a church in Arkansas, a pastor there who we're going to have on soon. Similar, he feels that leading of God saying this model's not working. We need to go a different way. And he's saying that basically if the church doesn't follow me in this, then I'll go and do my own thing. We had another pastor of a mega church on recently. Same thing. He went away on a mission trip, saw the discipleship making movements and said, my church isn't doing that. Went back, resigned, and he now is involved with discipleship making movements. So there's so many people now, even in England as well, pastors of big churches saying we have to do things differently. And actually there's an episode we're about to release, and before he says this, he's like, this might sound like a heck of a thing to say. He says, but he was really praying about the direction the world is going in now and what's coming to England. And he says, I don't believe there's one church that's ready in England for what's about to happen. And he said, and he's a pastor, he's a very well-known pastor in England. And his whole thing is now getting ready for what's coming. And he says there's not one that he believes in the whole of England that's ready for what's coming our way. And so it's very interesting and exciting to see these people shifting the way they've been doing things. So it's exciting again to hear your story. God is doing something. There's a lot of movement happening. People are trying to align themselves to what they believe God is saying is going to happen in the future. I don't know if you have thoughts of where you see things going, and why you think it's so important that you've made this transition to go into home groups. I don't know if you can speak some to the times that we're in or what you see happening in the years ahead of us.
I mean, it's shocking how quickly culture now changes. Yep. And I think it's all because of technology, the internet. It's shocking. So the changes that are happening are rapid in happening. And so just from a cultural perspective and the disengagement with church today and the understanding it's not working is now starting to touch people. And we're seeing it in my context where many are disengaging from their faith or from the church. And then there's tons that are actually still followers of Christ, but don't go to church, or they can't find the church they want. So there's a lot of discontentment in the context of cultural shifts. So there's just starting to be signs like, hey, things aren't working and there's change coming. And so from a biblical perspective, I think that it's clear things will get darker. So darkness is going to grow. But then we also have the church is going to get brighter, the wheat and the tare conversation with Jesus. And so I have faith, actually, and I'm excited that actually the church is going to get hotter, on fire. And so there's a refining, I think, a chastening of the church and a maturing of the church. So I'm actually got hope, and I'm actually excited. Like, I'm not doing this to hunker down and to hide. I think this is the way forward. And so to me, the two words that are kind of we're using is maturing and strengthening. And so, Daniel 11:32, those who know God, they shall be strong and do great exploits. And so there is this place of strength and maturity, I believe, that's coming to the body. And in that, in the midst of storms, we have clarity on Jesus, our mission. There's the power of the gospel, and then there's the power of the Holy Spirit. And so I'm not negative on the large church. I actually believe in the large gatherings, but I don't think it should be the central, and I don't think it should be the regular appetite. But in some house church people are like, never again. We actually do house churches, and then we also have times where we come together. But the norm is the smaller setting.
I think in the small, you get the intimacy of God, and in the big, you get the transcendence of God.
Come on.
And it's the two wings. You need both wings. Two wings, you fly. You need the intimacy and you need the transcendence. So I think, it's we see it like the small groups are the bricks of which the wall is built. You take away the small groups, you have no wall, but when you put them together, you have a wall. And I think that is a big paradigm shift. People say, well, yes, we've got house groups. Well, yes, you have groups that are in houses, but it's not the life. It isn't the church. It isn't. So, this is really encouraging and exciting to speak to you.
What has struck me is being at IHOP, being raised, formed there in many ways. Passion for Jesus would be a life message of Mike Bickle. And that captured me. So the first commandment. And then what has massively disrupted me is the second commandment is like the first. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh my goodness. So the same priority, passion, and pursuit that I've put into loving God, I need to put into loving people. It is absolutely second. There's a prioritizing, but it is like the second. Yes, like the first, I think, in its importance and in how God views things. And it is as we touch that, as we genuinely have Jesus at the center of our churches, gather around him, and in that love one another, it will be a powerful storyline in the unbeliever finding Christ, because I have real life interaction with people who love me like Christ loves me. And there's something there about community and real life on life building of relationship and that whole forming of relationship. So I think when I didn't fully, I was just thinking, answer the question where it's going. I'm positive there's going to be some conflicts globally coming that is going to destabilize most systems. So we have a little microcosm of Russia and Ukraine right now, and that has destabilized that whole region. And I'm wondering if there's not more coming. And that will be a major destabilizing factor for many. And then what will come out of that will be probably makes you wonder if there will be a new superpower idea rising up. I've got totally speculation, but it's just fun ideas to talk about. But in the destabilizing, that is where the believer who's mature and strong will actually be a voice that people can follow as opposed. And so that's why maturity and strength is important to me. And even if it's not a global conflict, there's just so many voices that are absolutely lies. And this generation is just wholeheartedly following. But when they hear truth, it rings in their ear. And I believe that we need to be speaking truth about Jesus, not politics, not love of country, not love of anything, of Jesus. That's the gospel. It is the gospel that has the power to save. And in that, I think we will have. That's what I'm preparing people for. That's what I'm aiming for.
Well, as we close, you said about our love for one another. Love God, love one another. That is the gospel. I mean, it's not the gospel, but it's the methodology almost, because he said, "By this will all men know." When you have love for one another. So that is, it's not just to have a happy, clappy time and everybody feel good together, but it is the methodology of the gospel.
Yeah. Dwayne, thank you so much. We've loved having you on, really enjoyed the conversation. There's a bunch of other things that we could have gone into. Maybe we can do that another time. But thank you so much for taking the time. We really, really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been delightful. Absolutely enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Have some fish and chips for me. I love fish and chips.
We'll have to do that. Thank you for listening to this episode. Remember, if it inspired you, share it with others so we can see more people engaged in this community.